Okay guys, we're just going to explain some of our Anderson plug kits today and the differences between the kits, when to choose which kit, and we're going to show you how to install it into a vehicle. So behind us we have a 200 series Land Cruiser. We're going to install it into that today, but these kits aren't vehicle specific. They're designed to go into basically any vehicle. So certain parts of the installation will vary depending on what vehicle you're putting them into, but hopefully this will be a guide of how to get it into your car. But firstly, let's go through the differences between the two kits. So the two main differences between these kits is one is a standard straight through cable to the rear, and the other one has an isolator on it. So let's talk about that for starters, when to choose an isolator and when not to choose an isolator. So firstly, this vehicle is going to get the standard kit. And the reason being is he's already got a dual battery system under here. He's got a DC-DC charger here, and he just tows a basic camper trailer with a single lead-based battery in it. So what we're going to do is wire this Anderson plug to his auxiliary battery. They're the same type of battery, so we can do this. And we're going to use this DC-DC charger to charge this one and the battery in his camper. The difference between that is if you had a camper with a DC-DC charger in it, the only difference would be which battery we chose to go to. So if he had another DC-DC charger in his camper trailer, we wouldn't wire it to the auxiliary battery, we'd wire it to the main battery. And that would effectively allow both the DC-DC chargers to run together. So it would allow 25 amps from this charger to charge this battery, and 25 amps going to the trailer's DC-DC charger if it had a 25 amp charger in it as well. The reason we wouldn't put that on this battery, just to give you an example, is if we had a DC-DC in there trying to suck 25 amps out of this battery, we're trying to push 25 amps in from that battery. Effectively, we're pumping 25 in and taking it straight out. So this battery is effectively getting nothing. So if we had two DC-DC chargers, we'd want the trailer one wired to that battery and this one left alone to do its own charging. So that sort of runs through the use of this Anderson plug. Now, this is also available in a 4BNS cable, which is a bigger cable. And we basically say that this one's good to run a 25 amp charger in your camper. If you had like an Enerdrive 40 amp or the Redarc 40-50 amp charger, you definitely want to get the bigger size cable, and that's 4BNS, just to allow that excess current to go down and not to get voltage drop down the line. So that's kind of a run through of the standard Anderson plug kit. We'll move on to one with an isolator now, and when you might want to use that. So when we're dealing with a DC-DC charger in a camper, they basically have an inbuilt isolator and we don't require one. But say you were trying to run a 3-way fridge in your Caravan through an Anderson plug, then you would probably want an isolator on it, as they draw, depending on the size of the fridge, they can draw up to 20-25 amps. So we definitely want, when we shut the car down, we want it to kill powder the Anderson so that it can't flatten our vehicle batteries. And we definitely wouldn't want to wire that to the auxiliary battery. We would want it off the main battery so the alternator can keep up with it as we're traveling along and supply the current to the fridge and not be sucking it out of that auxiliary battery. So that's kind of a couple examples of when you would need an isolator and when you wouldn't. So we'll just run through, since we're not installing this one, what the difference would be in this kit. So you can see we've got some 6mm bolts already included in the kit for mounting, and these are the mounting holes for this unit. Now, quite often we can find a spot on a mudguard of most vehicles where there is already a thread for a 6mm bolt, and we can just utilize one of these. We may not require that nut. It'd be highly unlikely that we could get two of them to match up, so we may require drilling a hole for the other one and mounting it through our mudguard. There's one other part on this Redarc isolator, and you'll notice there it's got written ground. So this wire needs to be grounded, and that's why we've already got it through that lug to make that quite clear, that that needs to go through and get a mount to the chassis basically to give it an earth, and that's for the electronics in that module to operate. So that's really the only differences in the installation. All the wiring's done, it's just mounting that charger, or that isolator, sorry. So just run through of what comes in the kit as well. So this pack is going to come with either kit, whichever you buy. We've got mounting nuts and bolts. This bracket is designed to place our Anderson plug beside our trailer plug, so we'll get into that down the back, and then some cable ties to aid in the installation as well. So hopefully that answers a few questions about Anderson plugs, which one to choose. If you jump on the website, you'll see a bit more of a guide, or you can drop us a line, contact us if you've got any more questions. But now that that's answered, hopefully we've answered most of the questions. So let's get into installing this kit into this vehicle and give you a bit of a guide of how to get it into your four-wheel drive. Okay, so we're just going to install this Anderson plug now into the vehicle. You'll notice we've got a 7-meter cable here, Anderson plug on one end, fuse holder, and electrical connections on the other end. So basically this is going to be the last thing that we do, is connect to our batteries. So the first step is basically to route our cable from the engine bay to next to the trailer plug where we're going to plug into our camper. So I'm just going to run this cable out. And this may vary on each make and model of vehicle, but basically the route that we're going to take is away from the battery towards the firewall of the vehicle, running down the inside of the mudguard, I guess you'd say, down to the chassis rail. And on most vehicles we're going to have existing harnesses going to the rear that we can tie to and cable tie our harness to. So we'll follow the rear lighting harness heading to the back, and that'll be a good route to follow. Now there's a few things to keep in mind. This vehicle in particular, we don't have a side of the engine that doesn't have an exhaust. It's a V8, so we have exhaust coming out of both sides of the engine. So we can't go down one side to try and avoid heat. Both sides have heat. So a couple things to keep clear of is the exhaust, obviously. So anything hot, anything moving, we definitely want to keep our cable away from. And we do have a moving part in this side of the vehicle as well. Being the right hand side, the driver's side, we have the steering controls coming out of the firewall there. So I'm going to basically route this cable down, follow the mudguard past inside of the steering column down to get to the chassis rail. And once I can see my cable on the ground, I'll basically pull it all through and then we'll lay underneath, cable tied to the harness. So I'm just going to thread that down now. So you can see I'm just trying to keep the Anderson as close to the mudguard as I can, going under the brake lines. And now that I've got it through there, I'll lean over and make sure it clears the steering arm. So I'm just going to lean over here, the brake booster. I'll give you a close-up once I get it through there, making sure it's on the right side of the steering arm, and it's gone down past the chassis rail where I need it to be. So I'll just show you. You can see my hand there holding the harness. So this is our harness. You can see I've tried to keep it as close to the mudguard as I can. If you come further down this way, we'll see if I can get my hand in there. Oh. Can see I've gone close to the mudguard inside these brake lines, so that's another thing to keep away from. And we're down to the chassis rail. So now that I've got it through that section, I know I'm down on the chassis rail. I can jump underneath the vehicle and pull that excess cable all the way through. If it's difficult, there is we can actually take that grey plug off, but usually on most makes and models we find it's easy to, there's plenty of room to get that grey plug all the way down to save having to do that. Okay, so we've pulled our cable all the way through now, or all the way through to underneath the vehicle, so we can follow the chassis route now. So I'm just making sure I've got enough length left up here to get me to the battery and connect to the terminals, which I have. So now I can go about routing it along the chassis rail. And this will change depending on the vehicle that you're doing it on, what we've got under there. But we're looking for basically electrical looms, or even the chassis rail itself we can cable tie to on the inside. So we're just going to try and get it now from here to the back to our trailer plug. Okay, so now that we've got our cable down to the rear of the vehicle, before we go and cable tie all that up, usually like to start from the back now towards the battery, because that's the last thing we're going to do. So we're going to go about mounting our Anderson plug here. You'll see in the kit we've got a metal bracket and a cover for the Anderson plug to make it nice and neat. So I'll just show you the idea of the bracket. Basically, it's going to mount off the trailer plug, like so, and it'll allow us to mount our Anderson plug in a flip down cover like that. So the first thing we're going to do is remove the trailer plug from the vehicle. So using a spanner, either a shifter spanner and just a screwdriver. So we're just going to remove each of these bolts. Set them aside. So we're just gonna, you'll see there's a screw holding this cover together. We'll just remove that screw. Just holding your finger over the hole on the other side just to make sure we don't lose that nut. And this just comes apart in two pieces. So what we're gonna do, you'll see there's little ribs inside here. 1, 2, 3, 4 ribs. Want to line those up with the Anderson, so sitting it in that way, line up those ribs, and you'll see the ribs on the side of the Anderson, so we're just lining them up with the ones in the housing. And then we'll take our rubber grommet that we just removed, reinsert that over the cables. Just might need to spread our cables just to make sure they're sitting in the grooves. And then lining up the bolt with the front hole in the Anderson. And lining up our grommet with the grooves in the plug. Just making sure it all sits together nicely. And then we can go ahead and screw this up. This kind of just holds it into position because the mounting bolts also hold it together once we get it onto that plate. So right now we're kind of just lining everything up like so. Now that we've got that together, we can put our plate on. So you'll see the holes all line up to the ones in the Anderson plug bracket. So using our bolts supplied in the kit, I'm going to use 4 of them to go through the Anderson plug. There we go, I've got an Anderson mounted to the bracket, and you can see that's what it's going to look like. So next we want to get our remaining 2 bolts, put them through the holes in the existing trailer plug, and then get that to go through the holes that line up on our bracket like so. Place that through through the existing Toyota trailer plug bracket in this case, but this may vary slightly on each vehicle. But every trailer plug has the same spacing, so it's all pretty standard. We'll do these up finger tight. And there we go, it's all done up and secure. You can see it's just a waterproof or water resistant protective cover for that Anderson plug, just to make it look a bit like the trailer plug. It's nice and neat and it's a bit more protected. So now that we've installed down the back, we can go ahead and use the cable ties supplied in the kit to secure our harness the whole way back to the engine bay. And the last thing we do is make the electrical connections. Okay, so we've mounted the plug down the back, we've secured our harness the entire way up to the engine bay. The last thing to do is just to make our electrical connections. And it's pretty obviously marked: battery positive, the red one; battery negative, the black one. So just checking that it's the same on our battery terminal. So we've got our positive on this side in this case, and our negative on this side. So we're just going to go ahead and take these nuts off. Start by putting our positive on. And then move on to our negative. So I'm just going to nip that positive up tight. Place our negative terminal on. And there we go, nice neat Anderson connection there. Now we've got the fuse holder here that we want to mount. So there's a couple options. There's a steel frame there. In this case, we could screw it to a frame, or quite a popular way to do it is just to simply cable tie it to the battery hold down clamp. So with some of the cable ties supplied, secure that like so. Move our earth around here. Maybe use a couple cable ties on this. And you can see our fuse holder is also labelled Anderson so that we know what it is down the track. If we ever have any issues, we know where to go. Cut those off. I'm just going to cable tie this down to another harness running through here. Change the direction on that just to make our cables look nice and neat. So there we go, that's the full installation of an Anderson plug kit into this vehicle.